GPU, CPU, and other tech-related prices, which way are they going to go? Well, you guys have requested that I do a tech Yesonomics video where that's looking at the global economic macro conditions, and then also at the end of the video, we relate that to the tech sector and look at which way I think prices are going to go. Are they going to go up? Are they going to go down? Now, in our previous video, we did look at CPU prices in particular, and I thought they were going to come down. And now we're at a place where CPU prices have actually indeed come down to the cheapest levels I have ever seen them in my life. In fact, inflation adjusted, you can pick up Ryzen 7 8 cores, 16 threads for around $150, or even cheaper if you look on AliExpress. But then speaking of AliExpress, you can get, for instance, an i5 12400F for around $100 also. These were prices that were previously demanded of our trusty little pal, the i3s. But that now seems like that $100 level is more friendly to an i5, which is great news for us consumers. But don't jump out of your chair just yet in excitement and joy, because there is some very concerning news just around the corner, which we'll get onto right after today's video sponsor. Never pay full price for Windows 10 or 11 again. With today's video sponsor, SCD Keys, you can get activated for as little as $15 using that coupon BFTYC. Links in description below. Welcome back to Tech Yes City, and what we've seen over the last few years unfold, I think a lot of people request these videos because what's more concerning is the things that are happening outside of tech. And so what we're seeing with tech prices in particular is that they've been forced to come down, whether it be in real terms or even nominal adjusted terms, because everything else that people need in their lives, like food, gas, and rent, for instance, have all gone up substantially, and they've gone up substantially above these numbers that we see from governments. For instance, they're telling us that the CPI print right now is in the 3% band. And when we look at Shadow Stats, for instance, which uses a metric based on the 1990s levels, it's still well above 7%. And so our interest rates at 5% still dictate in this current environment that we are in a sticky situation where real interest rates are actually negative. That means that people who can borrow, and it's usually those who have a lot more assets and have a lot more forward momentum, it's called the Cantillon effect. I'll quickly show it up on the screen for you. It means that these people can still take advantage of these essentially cheaper interest rates that exist, and they keep borrowing and they keep piling onto the inflation. And so relating this now back to everybody's favorite central banker, Jay Powell at the Federal Reserve, they're actually talking about dropping interest rates rather than raising them. And so in this scenario later on this year, if the markets in not just the US, but Australia and the UK, for instance, if there's interest rate cuts, you're going to see the exact same problem take place that happened in 2020 and 2021. And that's just people will then go to the banks, start borrowing again and raising the prices of everything, not just houses, food, and cars. And of course, tech products, your favorite graphics cards, your favorite CPUs, they will all go up in price as well, even though through time it's proven that tech products are a luxury item when the value of the dollar itself is going down. And this is how I like to tell people at Tech Yes City how to think of money. It's not so much that the prices are going up, it's the value of the current dollar you hold is going down. And so when that happens, the prices essentially go up on everything. However, relating this back now to the markets, what we're seeing right now with the M2 money supply is it seems to be in a bit of a tug of war. It wants to go up, it wants to go down, but regardless, it is stabilizing. And with these higher levels of inflation, that only means less of a piece of the pie for everyone out there. However, since there's been a massive rise in the M2 money supply, especially post-2008, the great financial crisis, that's only balancing the scales in favor of prices going up. However, it's created this very interesting tug of war that's taking place right now, where those who have money seem to be making more money, and those that don't have money are seeming to fall behind more and more. And this is all that's been taking place ever since 2020. However, I think the effects of it are seeming more and more obvious to the average person, especially the people like you and I who are not in the top 1% of the wealth bracket. And so that category has done a lot better. And essentially the 99% has had to pay or get fleeced by what's known as a transfer method called inflation. However, in our previous economics videos, we have looked at this M2 money supply graph, which I do follow closely, and we have also looked at the Federal Reserve reducing their balance sheet via what's known as quantitative tightening. They've also got another facility called the Bank Term Funding Program, and this has come to a pause, and you can see the numbers in this fund have been going down. And so all these things considered, this should indicate that prices should be coming down. And that's exactly what we have seen, especially in relation to CPUs and other tech-related products like motherboards and even DDR5 and DDR4 memory. However, what is waiting around the corner is probably why you guys clicked on this video and decided to tune in, because you want to know which way are things going to go. Now, here's the point where I disclaimer, as much as I'd like to have a crystal ball and I wish I could see the future, I can only do calculated guesses on what's to come. And so in other words, I can't tell you exactly what's going to happen, but I can make a bold assumption, and that is I do believe if things stay the same, if the governments don't start handing out money again and they don't drop the interest rates and they actually decide to even perhaps raise the interest rates, then you will see your tech products, even though they're on very tight margins right now, you will start to see them come down a little bit more. I do believe they're reaching a level right now, especially in relation to some products like power supplies, cases, and things that have low margins to begin with. I do believe products like these have somewhat stabilized, and they just simply cannot get any cheaper, especially when we look at raising wages and everything involved in Western economies. When you relate that back to the prices of these products, they can only really edge higher over time. And so what you'll see in the next 6 months is products with low margins having to edge higher. Otherwise, the companies selling those products will simply go out of business. Now, let's talk about CPU prices first, and we'll get onto GPU prices very soon. But with CPU prices, we have seen that they have come down actually substantially in the last few months, to the point where the 7800X3D is the top selling CPU. And that's not just in America, it's also in Australia when I talk to other retailers. That's come down in price, but it's the #1 selling CPU. And so that right there is a sign of the market itself saying that the consumer wants not just value, but AMD wants to move these chips at a margin where they can make the most profit. And so for them, lowering the price to $300 is much more feasible than them keeping it at $400, because they'll just simply know that people will go out and buy another CPU, and they don't want to give that sale to Intel. So actually AMD out of the CPU market right now has actually been extremely smart in their sales tactics, and this is forcing Intel to actually lower their prices more than I think they're comfortable doing. And so actually, like we said in the intro, I haven't seen an i5-12400F or an i5 for that matter this cheap in my lifetime, especially inflation adjusted. So there are crazy dynamics taking place in the market right now, to the point where not just is AMD leading in sales now on consumer desktop CPUs, but they're also doing a great job in providing good value. In fact, some of my favorite picks right now is not just the Ryzen 7 7800X3D, but also the Ryzen 7 5700X. I believe both these CPUs offer extremely good price performance and also give you a bit of room outside of gaming to do some workstation related stuff. Though just like power supplies and cases, for instance, I don't see prices getting a whole lot cheaper here. And even if the economic conditions in the M2 money supply stabilizes even for another 6 months and the government does stop the printers and continues with quantitative tightening, which I'm actually skeptical of, even if this continues, we won't see the prices come down a whole lot more, because as we explained before, they just simply cannot. Then now's probably a better time than ever, especially being in a low season, which we'll talk about, and this will segue into GPU prices very perfectly. But now's a better time than ever to buy a gaming PC, because it is always the possibility that those printers spool back up again from central banks, and then prices just keep going up. And this was one of the scariest graphs that I'll pull up for you guys that I saw before, was relating what's going on now to the 1970s. And in the 1970s, the US, Australia, UK, a lot of developed nations in this period experienced what was called the Great Inflation. And this essentially had inflation in the double digits. And if we look at this graph, we've seen disinflation, and that's different from deflation, but we've seen this inflation come down, but now it's starting to stabilize. And if we relate that to the 1970s trend, inflation then just takes off again with a vengeance. And so if this is going to be the future coming months or coming years, then tech prices are also going to be getting a lot more expensive, even though you'll see businesses go out of business. Like recently, Gamers Nexus and Jay's 2 Cents covered EK. That's just going to be another victim, however, in a period known as stagflation, which was actually the term we should use when we talk about the 1970s. And it's the term that we should definitely be using going through this recent period that we've all experienced. Then what about the final talking point of today's video? That is the GPU price. This is the most important product where people go out and buy multiple GPUs just to please their girlfriends. They'll go out and buy the latest GPUs just so they can play their games that are 10 years old at now from 200 FPS to 400 FPS. What is it about the GPU and the prices here? Well, what we've seen right here is NVIDIA is still dominating the GPU sector. They still command the prices ultimately, but there's also this other curveball that's been thrown in the picture. And that, of course, is the AI demand. And so the demand for NVIDIA silicon has actually been so high to the point where it's kept things like RTX 4090s artificially high because the gamers aren't buying them. It's actually, there's this sort of like gray market chain that's going through where people will sell them to people in China because there's a ban that's taken place right now. But we've seen also other products get absorbed by AI PCs. In fact, the PC sector is forecasted to grow in general, but this is due to AI demand. And so although GPU prices may seem expensive right now, I do believe out of all the products we've spoken about here today, I do believe the GPU prices actually could come down once this AI fervor subsides from the market. And so I believe that'll happen actually in the next coming months. I do believe a lot of companies have perhaps over leveraged their bets on AI. And I do think this market will slow down. And when it slows down, there'll be more for the gamers to pick up. And of course, the gamers will only be interested in picking up these products at cheaper prices, just like we've seen with all the rest of the prices in the tech scene. However, that being said, even though I'm saying all things considered, prices on pretty much most tech products will stay the same, GPU prices have room to fall, that's contingent upon the central banks not printing up any more money and keeping things relatively at the same levels in the next coming months or even possibly a year. But I am very skeptical about that happening. I do believe the printers will spool back up because I do believe perhaps there is some kind of GFC-like shock coming where someone on Reddit actually pulled up a graph where it showed that there's only 4 times in history where there's been an inverted yield curve on treasury bonds that has lasted more than 500 days. And we're in one of those periods right now, but the preceding 3 periods have all had massive stock crashes that have happened after those 500 days. One of those was 1929, another was 2008, but the most interesting was 1974, which I believe is the most applicable in terms of relating that to what's happening now, because the 1970s had a high amount of inflation. So to sum everything up in today's video, tech prices will remain relatively good, except the GPU prices. For the next few months, there may be a shock in the markets that cause GPU prices to come down temporarily, and then that's going to be followed by what I believe mass printing of central banks, and then we'll see prices go up from there. However, all of this, of course, is just one man's opinion on YouTube. And with that aside, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, then be sure to hit that like button. And also let us know in the comment section below, what are your thoughts and opinions currently on tech prices and on the macro environment in general? And what about your local area? Are you doing well where you are? Because where I am locally here on the used market, things are pretty bad, especially for sellers, but for buyers, it's actually really good. And so that's a trend that I've seen taking place this year, and I do believe it's going to continue. So do look forward to the upcoming parts hunt here on the channel. I'm sure I'm going to be finding out and sniffing out some really good bargains. Also, before I get on out of here, we do have the question of the day, which comes from Blaze730, and they ask, do you think motherboard vendors share some of the blame? After all, the optimized defaults appear to pump a lot of voltages into these CPUs. So with this question, they're referring to our previous video. We talked about the instability issues on Intel CPUs, in particular their i9s. And here's where I feel, although some of the blame will be on the motherboard manufacturers, I believe in general the majority of the blame here falls on Intel. This is a company that we have to remember locks out the board partners from setting higher memory limits back on, say, a B460 motherboard. They even lock motherboard manufacturers out of doing things like making external clock generators to try and get higher clock speeds on CPUs. And so if they're policing their BIOSes like this and policing the motherboard manufacturers like this, then the same goes for policing i9 14900K limits and all these other voltages as well. The bottom line is Intel allows the motherboard manufacturers to do it. In fact, I believe they encourage it because they want to get the highest benchmark scores. And so unfortunately, when that does happen, you create an augmented disadvantage in the process. And that, of course, is instability. Now, this instability has like another layer of, it just keeps going. It's like this chain reaction of disadvantages. And that, of course, now is goodwill and reputation that they're losing as well due to these issues. And so we've talked about all this in the previous video, though to answer this question, which we actually didn't talk about, I believe the majority of the blame falls on Intel here because I know what they push on the partners in terms of making BIOSes and how they enforce those limits. And so with Intel, of course, you're the maker of the CPU. You should be enforcing how it should run. Anyhow, hope that answers that question. And with that aside, I'll catch you guys in another tech video very soon. If you've stayed this far and you're enjoying that Tech Yes content, then be sure to hit that like button, ring that sub bell, and I'll see you in another tech video very soon. Peace out for now. Bye.